I don't know if you really understand how big David got at this point. David blew up so fast. He was on the front page of every newspaper, the gossip of every tabloid, the subject of every podcast, every post. David for King hashtag was trending on every social media platform. The guy literally broke the internet with his selfies of Goliath in his head. In the next few years were unimaginable in terms of a rise to fame. You can't even understand how big it was. He was more than a rising star. This guy was a supernova in the sky. He was enormous. He was the most popular person in Israel. He was the desire of every heart. This guy was unstoppable. He was the hope of the hearts of Israel that desired a real king, a real leader. They were so over Saul, they were ready to get rid of him anyway. The song that made fun of the king and celebrated David, it was so well known on the radio that it made its way all the way down to Gath. Even people in Gath knew he was the young lady's song in Israel. He was the old guy's toast. Everyone wanted his autograph. He was on the front page of all newspapers. Every social media post contained someone saying something about David. He was an absolute overnight celebrity, blew up. He was an influencer of the day. And yes, I'm sure there were probably a few memes made about him as well. But the problem is, he became bigger than the king. He was more popular than the administration. He was the opening act, outshining the main act. He wasn't supposed to be the headliner, but he stole the show. He was the bridesmaid showing up the bride. He was the senator giving the better speech than the prime minister. He was the engineer outsmarting the CEO. Careful, you. But it was completely genuine. He wasn't trying to do any of that. It's just what he was, because it's what God made him to be. Yes, he was oozing with talent, and it's exactly what God needed for Israel at the time. But it wasn't a good political move. And from that time on, he had a target on his back. And David was going to be going through now, for the next couple of sessions, he was going to be going through a roller coaster like you guys wouldn't believe. He goes from the highest of high to the lowest of low. That ruthless trust that people came to know of him was going to be tried real hard. All of his supports that he grew to trust were going to be kicked out from under his feet. You know, Psalm 59 that we had in our discussion groups yesterday, some of us were like, why on earth are we talking about Psalm 59 today? Because Psalm 59 was the first time that David actually felt it wasn't lions, it wasn't bears, it was men. And men are the cruelest of all animals. And I want you to just think, as we look at this very short clip, I want you to just think for a moment what David was facing now, and as he has to leave a place of trust that he thought was a place he was safe, has now become a place of torment.
He can't. He's not well.
Not well. Not well, you say. Well, we shall see. We shall see. Not well. David? Yes. Yes. You have helped him escape. You would rather be queen than see your own father king. You would betray your own brother. Father. You need to rest now. David! David! David!
Josh Wallace once said that when we experience trials, we too find that we lose a grip on our sense of stability and purpose. We can spiral mentally into a place of tremendous difficulty, and we can lose our spiritual equilibrium, and it becomes difficult to discern and the way unclear and uncertain. It's a very disorienting experience. Examples of people in Scripture who face these crises of faith of sorts, people who become disoriented, they lost their spiritual equilibrium, and sometimes even their own sense of self. Each one of them faithful people grappling with situations which seemed beyond their ability to cope. And what's going to happen now is that amazing faith that we've seen in David. He's going to be brought to a place so low that he also feels like he cannot cope anymore. When we left Jonathan saying goodbye to David in chapter 20, they swear, it says, Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, because we have sworn, both of us, in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever." And he departed, and Jonathan went into the city, and off they went in two completely different directions that God had them going. So where do you go when you feel spiritually disoriented? What direction do you turn in? Where do you go? Do you turn to the world? Do you turn to social media? Do you turn to scrolling? Do you just try to bury your sorrows in nothing? Or do you go to the house of God? Well, that's exactly what David does in chapter 21. And I'm going to show a short clip here from The Chosen.
But for now, we must replace this with the heart. Reuben,
Simeon,
Levi,
Judah,
Mother. Everything's going to be fine. This is like a war. The king is on a mission. It's that no one is to do anything. Everything my men at a certain see. I understand you, the king, are not. It's not a mission from the king. Days, 100 days. And I know my men have been there. What do with the Bibles? What about that? That was replaced by the heart. Truly, they have no eyes. They've been in hiding area, waiting for me for days. Must be quick. Remember, what I'm about to give you is sacred. It's more sacred. So I'll find something to kill him. No. Something. It's called real. I can't feel it. Something bigger, more exciting. There is nothing bigger, more exciting than that.
And so David spends his last moment with Ahimelech. And the one thing that doesn't show up in that video, but is quite notable, is that he asks if there are any weapons around. And what does he get? He gets a sword. Not just any sword. The best sword around, Goliath's sword. And strangely, this is where I start talking about spiritual disorientation. Imagine what happens next. You have in your hand the sword of Goliath. And where might you go, being the last major adversary of the Philistines, killing their hero? Where would you go if you were not disorientated? Well, you probably wouldn't go where David goes. And in the next verse, verse 10 of chapter 21, it says that David rose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. Achish, king of Gath? Are you serious? And you've got in your hand Goliath's sword? What are you thinking? And of course, they say what I said earlier. They know all about the song. They know all about the conflict with Saul. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why they accepted him. But David began to be afraid in verse 12. David took the words to heart and was much afraid of the king of Achish, the king of Gath. And so what does David do? Does he pray before God? Does he take a spiritual perspective? Does he look for God's deliverance? No. What does he start to do now? Well, that amazing spiritual perspective that he has begins to manifest in some very strange behavior. In fact, it says in verse 13 that David changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane in their hands and made marks on the doors and let the spit run down his beard, so much so that Achish said, "Do I have enough mad people in my thing? You're out of here. Shall this fellow come into my house? He behaves like a madman. I'm going to get him out of here." Strange behavior from David. And you know what, young people? We do some really strange things when we get spiritually disoriented. We do some strange things. And sometimes, like David, we might try to take matters into our own hands, come up with our own cunning plan to make things work, come up with our own arrangement of how things ought to be and how am I going to get myself out of this bind. And David is going to do that over the next little bit. We're going to see David make some questionable decisions. He's going to be spiritually disoriented. And if that's you today, I really pray that this message will land on your heart and renew you to make good decisions and to, like David, take his perspective that we're going to see in these Psalms. Now, the Psalms are very important for this period. Literally, this period, almost every couple of verses, a new psalm is composed. Let me just show you what that looks like. Just have a look at the succession of psalms that come out during this time. The one thing that David never put down was his pen and his lyre and harp. Because this is how, and look, some of you guys know what I'm talking about. Music is a way to process your feelings, to come clean before God, to be open and honest before him. And David's pen is writing more now than ever has before. And some of the best songs that we have are written in times of adversity, in times of trial. Some of our most moving songs that we have are written in those times. But just have a look. He writes Psalm 59 in the scene in the first video clip. He writes Psalm 56 just then in what we just read. And then he writes Psalm 34 when he's thinking about going crazy. When he changed his behavior before Achish. He writes Psalm 34. And then we're about to get to Psalm 142 in the next verse. But you see what's happening? David is using music to process his feelings. He's codifying his journey. And aren't we so thankful that he did? We are the beneficiaries of David writing down what he felt. And I am so thankful for that because when I'm feeling spiritually disoriented, these are the Psalms I'm going to. When I'm feeling like I don't have my feet, I'm going here. And I'm asking you guys to do that too. Don't go to your phone. Don't go to Insta. Go to the Psalms. The Psalms will carry you through like nothing else can. I like to quote from actually someone who's a friend of mine now. He's the leader of Sons of Korah. He lives in Geelong. His name is Matt Jacoby. And in addition to writing some amazing psalms put to music, some of you might know and enjoy, he also is an amazing writer, and he wrote a whole book about the Psalms and about the deeper places that Psalms bring you to, and I'd like to quote from that now. Many of David's Psalms were written during the painful fugitive years when, though having been given the divine promise of kingship, he lived as an exile, often in caves in the desert. The agony of David's weight lay largely in the fact that the kingship promised to him by God seemed so imminent. He had been anointed by God's prophet. He had defeated Israel's enemy. These were the customary rights to become a king, but they had not landed him where he had expected. And that might be you guys today. You ever make a series of good choices that you think is the right decision for God, and you feel like you got left high and dry? You ever feel like Joseph, like you made all those good decisions and you land up in prison? You think, God, what are you talking? What's going on? You shake your fist at the sky, you start yelling at God. You think, what are you doing? I did everything right here. This is my reward for my service to you. And that's why it's spiritually disorienting. It's very difficult to make sense of that in life. When you think you did all the right things, you think you made all the right choices, and you get landed in prison or in a cave, alone, destitute, sad, weary and worn and sad, as we're going to sing later in hymn 330, weary and worn and sad. That's what I get for making good godly choices. And so these Psalms are very helpful for us. And one of the things that David does, I feel, through these Psalms, particularly in Psalm 34, which is going to be our discussion group later. In Psalm 34, he has perspective. Because guess what, guys? Praise brings perspective. You ever wonder why in Isaiah chapter 61, you ever wonder why it says of Christ, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bring the good news to everyone. And one of the things that Christ says he's going to give is the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. The garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Why? Because praise gives perspective. Praise reorients our mind when it's disoriented. Because you can't let praise flow without having a perspective of God. Not genuine praise, at least. You guys know what I'm talking about. Praise is good. And so David is writing these Psalms, and you see him a lot of times through these Psalms wrestling. And Psalm 34 is one of those things. In Psalm 34, verse 21 to 22, he says, the Lord redeems the life of his servants. None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned. Meantime, this is the guy that's taking refuge in Gath. But you see what he's doing? He's writing the truth. Even if he's not making the right decisions, he's writing the feelings of what he should be. Because sometimes, young people, you need to step through the motions, even if you don't feel them. And in stepping through the motions, those feelings will enter into your heart, and all of a sudden your perspective changes. Sometimes, guys, you just have to do the right thing and say the right thing and just press through. And God will awaken those feelings in you of genuine expression. You need to pray like we sing in our hymn. Lead me, Lord. Lead me in your righteousness. Make your way plain before my face. Because thou, Lord only, can make me dwell in safety. So let's pick up the record one more time. Let's go to 1 Samuel 22. And amazingly, pretty much the whole rest of this class is going to get through like a few verses. So talking about going slow, we're just going to take it nice and slow. So 1 Samuel now 22, and we're just going to look at the very first verse, and we're only going to look at the first half of the first verse. Now, no cheaters. Do not read the second half of the first verse. Deal? All right, I'm just checking. You guys are upright and honest young people. No reading on. David departed from there, that is Gath, and escaped to the cave of Adullam. Now, where is that? Let's just have a quick look-see here. So again, just try to orient yourself in Israel. He's over here in Gath, and he escapes to the cave of Adullam. One thing that's important to notice, he's relatively close to Bethlehem, kind of like a triangle. I think this is quite interesting. It juxtaposes going to Gath or going to his hometown. I think that's interesting. Make of it what you will. But suffice it to say that for the second half of the verse, which you haven't read yet, we are going to see why this is quite important here. So David is in the cave of Adullam. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about that. So anyone been to Israel before? Okay, anyone been to the cave of Adullam? Or what you thought was the cave of Adullam? I got a call from David Hackett. He was up here building the cave, and David Hackett gave me a call. And he goes, hey, James, I was just thinking, remember that time we built the tabernacle up at Hebron? Yeah. He goes, well, I'm building the cave of Adullam right now. So that's great, David. I love that. He goes, well, I was thinking. And he started telling me about how he saw the real cave of Adullam not too long ago. And it's true. The real cave of Adullam is on the top of a hill that overlooks, guess what? The Valley of Elah. It overlooks the place where David took Goliath. And you sort of wonder why he goes there. Does he know about this cave? It's a relatively small entrance to the top of the cave. It's covered with a bit of a grate there, but it's huge inside. It's enormous. It's actually quite a good place to go if you wanted to hide yourself and you didn't want to be found. So I want to think about this cave just for a moment before we think about what happens in that cave. And I just want to again thank the committee so much for building this place. I want you to just think about it. I love I feel like you guys raided the Halloween store. Is that what actually happened? It's like a very American thing to do. But yes, I feel like we went to the Halloween store. But a lot of what they have out there in the entrance here is actually quite true. I want you to think about what it was like to be in a cave in the wilderness. And I'm going to describe some things. I did a little bit of homework here to see what they would find there. And it turns out that in these caves, all kinds of Israeli creatures live. You have the Syrian wild ass, snakes, bats, spiders. I hate spiders. Asiatic lion, white oryx, the cheetah, the Syriatic brown bear, the desert lynx, all of these kind of creatures in this cave. And it could be a very scary place. And obviously it's dark. It's not like they had a cell phone with a light on it at that time. So it's dark. David probably doesn't want to be found, so he realizes he's in the dark. And he's there for a while. But guess what? That showbread that Himelech gave him eventually ran out. Showbread was gone. And then he starts thinking, I got to stay here, but I can't stay here or I'll die. But outside, I've got a bounty on my head. And now he's wrestling with God's promise. Where is the anointing? Where is the anointing oil? Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Really? Now? How's it feel in the cave? Is your cup running over now? And so he pens Psalm 142. And we're going to read the whole thing. Not that it's very many verses, but just so you know. Turn to Psalm 142. Now, as you guys know, many of the Psalms have these headings, and that's how we get that table that I put up before. And there's two Psalms that describe David in a cave. One of them is Psalm 142. Now, I believe Psalm 142, because of the mental state shown in Psalm 142, I believe this is the Psalm of the cave of Adullam. And I believe that Psalm 56 is the Psalm of En-Gedi, which we'll come to a little bit later when he's in the cave there. 57, rather. So Psalm 142, try to get your mind connected here to David's, I'm going to say depression, and I'll let you make the conclusion on that. With my voice, I cry out to Yahweh. With my voice, I plead for mercy from Yahweh. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble before him. When my spirit faints within me, you know my way. In the path where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see. There's no one who takes notice of me. No refuge remains for me. No one cares for my soul. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring me out of prison, that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, and you will deal bountifully with me. Mental health is a real challenge for our generation. I know all about it in my family. I have multiple people in my family who have depression, and they wrestle with Black Dog every day. And when people with depression feel low, they feel alone. They feel like they're in prison. I can't even look at some of you. I know some of you feel that way. I know what it's like to have family end up in the hospital because they just don't want to live anymore. And some of you have been there. When you feel like no one cares for your soul, you just feel like there's nobody, I'm just alone. Your spirit is faint. You feel like everyone's hiding a trap for you. And then you cry to God, you say, bring me out of prison. And David was like in a real prison. He was in a dark, cold, barren, cavernous space. He's in jail. And I know some of you feel like you have a life sentence to this kind of mental challenge. I get it. But I'm sorry. But this psalm tells you where to go. This psalm gives you the perspective. This psalm tells you what to do. Cry to him. Don't be silent. Use your voice. Look what it says in verse 1. With my voice I cry out. With my voice I plead. If you have to yell at the sky, yell at the sky. At least you're talking to God. At least you're talking to him. And that's your perspective. Don't hold it in. Don't not talk. Don't keep it inside. Let it out. Prayer is the greatest gift for depression. And not only prayer to God, but to each other. And that's exactly what David is hoping for. Look at the end of verse 7. He's like, the righteous will surround me, and you will deal bountifully with me. Turn back to 1 Samuel. Now you could read the second half of the first verse. Because look what God does. His perspective in Psalm 142, it actually fulfills. It actually happens. He's in this cave, and who comes to him? And when his brothers, and look who shows up. His brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down to him. His family showed up. These are the people that only a couple chapters ago were berating him. They were thinking ill of him. They didn't understand him. They were rebuking him. And these are the people that now see Saul for what he is, and they show up. And the one group of people that we need when we're down low, when we're in a cave, when we're in prison is your family. Guys, you got to show up for each other. We are the whole family in heaven and earth. We are the brothers and sisters. That's what we are. You remember in Mark chapter 10 when Peter says, Lord, we've left everything to follow you. You remember when he said that? He said, Lord, we gave up everything to follow you. And some of the gospel records go on to say that no one has left houses, mothers, sisters, brothers for my sake that will not receive 100-fold. Mark's version of that gospel, in Mark chapter 10, it says, no one has left father, mother, sister, brother, houses or lands for my sake that will not receive 100-fold now in this time. Brothers, sisters, mothers, houses or lands with persecution, and in the life to come, eternal life. This is it. This is the 100-fold. This is the 400-fold. And we need to show up when we're in the cave and we're down low. The people that need to show up are the 400-fold. We need to be there for one another. And it's so amazing to know that David's family showed up. So as I said before, it's not very far from Bethlehem. They hear it. David's got kind of voices, people going around the land that are Davidites, I'll call them. And they report. And guess what? They show up. And we need to be able to show up for one another. The whole family in heaven and earth needs to show up. So when we think for a moment about this prayer moment of David, he's praying here. He's praying Psalm 142. And here's the answer to his prayer. Remember, guys, we were talking about that last night. Some of us were talking about this last night. We were up here, this exact group of people in those exact chairs, except for I was sitting on the edge there. They wouldn't let me have a chair. Anyway, but we talked about that, and then we prayed about it together. That's what it's all about. Getting together, praying together, standing there for one another. We are the family in heaven and earth. When you guys are low, I'm going to be there. When I'm low, are you guys going to be there for me? Are you? Yes. Good. I need it. And prayer will do that. Spurgeon once put it this way: pour out your thoughts, and you will see what they are. Show your trouble, and the extent of it will be known to you. Let all be done before the Lord, for in comparison with his great majesty of love, the trouble will seem as nothing. Why is that? Perspective. Prayer, in addition to praise, gives perspective. And sometimes it's not God who needs to hear it, it's you. So in these prayers, in these Psalms, David is figuring it out by praying. He's figuring it out by writing and praying. And in doing so, God is drawing out from him what he knows to be true. And God held every one of those tears in his bottle, and he holds your tears and mine, which I shall wipe now. Psalm 56 is another psalm right about this time, right? You remember Psalm 56? It's another psalm. We don't have time to do it this morning. But I do want to quote one thing from Psalm 56. Verses 8 and 9 says, "You have kept count of my tossings. You counted them. Every sleepless night, every tear that you've shed, he knows. He counts them. Like the hairs of your head are numbered, so are your tossings. And all your tears, he keeps in a bottle. Are they not in your book? Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? And then my enemies will turn back in the day when I call, because this I know, God is for me." Do you believe that? Harry Tennant put it this way: there are several psalms which speak of David's troubled wilderness experiences, and these psalms reveal a deep sensitivity of spirit and a trust in the everywhereness of God. Now, I think Harry Tennant made up that word. I don't think everywhereness is an actual word, but you get it. You know what he means. So Psalm 142, just think about it. He was alone in this cave. Nobody is there. He's in this huge cave, and then all these people show up. Now, interestingly enough, some more people show up. And that is where things start to get really complicated for David. 1 Samuel 22, and now we can read verse 2. So remember, he's alone in the cave. His family shows up. But now a whole bunch of other people show up, which he probably wasn't expecting or asking for. And it's not exactly the people that you want to show up when you're feeling depressed and downtrodden and downhearted. But nevertheless, they come. And look who shows up in verse 2. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him. You just think about that. You just think about that for a moment. David's praying to God, and he's saying, the righteous will surround me. So his family show up, and he says, I get it, got it. Jesse, he's good. My brothers, they were all right, but they've come around. They understand. The righteous will surround me. Not 400 frustrated, discontent, poor, angry individuals. And guess what, guys? As part of David's transformation to be a king, it was one thing to be a shepherd of 400 sheep. And I don't know how many his brothers said, oh, he's taking care of those few sheep. Let's assume that it was a few. This is the best fulfillment then of Jesus saying, you have been faithful over few things. I will make you ruler over many things. He's going to go from a few sheep to 400 sheep. And as we saw in our first study, we know that's how he looked at God's people. 400 distressed, in debt, and discontent people. What a motley crew. What a ragtag group of frustrated people. But by now, all David knew was on the fringe. He really didn't know what was going on. And when these guys started to tell David what was actually going on, how did these people become distressed and in debt? How did they become that way? 1 Samuel 8, verses 10 to 18, because Saul had sapped the land of Cash, took all of their men, built his kingdom, and that's exactly what Samuel said would happen. He said, let me show you the ways of a king. You want a king? You really want to have a king like all the nations? Let me show you what he's going to do to your kingdom. Why were they that way? Because of Saul. And as David started to hear these stories from these men, he started to have compassion on them. He started to really feel for them. He started to really understand what it was like to be under Saul outside of the royal household, even if he was running for Saul. I don't think he really understood how bad things had gotten in Israel at that time under Saul. And it says, and David became captain over them. David became captain over them. You know, sometimes when you're feeling down and you're feeling out of it, your family might recalibrate you, but the best thing to do is to do something. God gives us projects. There's endless things to do in ecclesial life. Rather than sitting in a corner and pining away in your sadness, move, do something. And God might be giving you an opportunity to rise up through your sorrows, right? You think about the cave. I got kids, so I just think about it. Look, a deep, dark, gloomy cave. We can't go over it. We can't go under it. We have to go. Exactly. It's good. I'm glad your parents read you that book. You got to go through it, and you have to do something. You can't just try to live under it, and you can't just pretend you're above it. You need to go through it. Yea, through the valley of the shadow of death. Through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And David is in this right now, and he's going to go through it by becoming a captain over these men. God says, I know a solution to your problem. I'm going to bring you 400 people that are in much worse shape than you, and I'm going to bring them to your doorstep, and you're going to minister to them, and you're going to become king of the cave. Harry Tennant put it this way: this was such an act of love, one to which David responded with that largeness of heart which endeared him to all those who were around him. It is remarkable that David's absence from public life and responsibility did not diminish his compassion for the people and his desire to render to help to anyone that he was able. Sometimes helping someone else is the best way to help yourself. So here's sort of another picture of one of the cavernous spaces there. And just think for a moment, just think about the safekeeping. And you guys can go through it yourself. Read Psalm 34, read Psalm 56, read Psalm 57, 68. You guys are going to do it in your discussion groups. And obviously we've read Psalm 142. David becomes the captain over them. And his captain, him becoming a captain, is the first time that we've seen him really officially take a kingly move, right? So all of this up till now is preparing David to become king. And this is really his first kingly act. Now, what I find beautiful about this moment, I think that's wonderful, is that I believe David starts giving exhortations in this cave. I think he takes out his lyre and he starts thinking about songs, and he starts singing to them. Now, we're going to do that tonight in this cave, and that's why we did it this way. I want you to really think about how many people are in this room right now? Close enough. About 400, right? Yes, about 400. Close. I think it's like 350, right? It's like about this many people. And the cave of Adullam is probably not too much different than where we are now. And so David is doing what I'm doing to you guys right now. He sees a bunch of people that are struggling, all the downhearted, distressed, all of you guys. No, I'm just kidding. But he says, I got to do something now. I'm carrying my own burdens, but the way that I'm going to unburden all my cares is by looking after you. And he becomes captain over them, and he takes that responsibility. I don't know if God commanded him to do that. I don't know. But what I do know is that he is writing all of these songs. And what I'd like to do now is just highlight a couple of things out of Psalm 34. Because Psalm 34, it was already written at this time. And I believe Psalm 34 now, this would be a fantastic time for David to be using this psalm. And I think he does. So the context of Psalm 34, we know that he's already written this psalm because he wrote this when he changed his behavior before Ahimelech. And he's talking about God's answering of his prayer. He believes that God is there, and look what happens. And somebody who was preparing this morning at breakfast, we were talking about this, so bring this into your discussion groups. But look what he says in verse 10. The young lions suffer and want hunger, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. And watch how he launches into an exhortation in the cave. And I think that he's singing this, so it's a beautiful, psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. We're encouraging one another. That's what you do with music. And in verse 11, it says, come. Just imagine David in the cave looking at the 400 people, and he says, come, O children, listen to me, and I will teach you the fear of the Lord. What man is there who desires life and loves many days that he may see good? And he starts exhorting them. Keep your tongue from evil. These are the people that are the downcast and downtrodden of the country. Keep your tongue from speaking evil and your lips from speaking deceit. Turn away from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears are toward their cry. The face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. And you see what he's doing? He's taking his actual circumstance, he's flipping it over, and he's saying, hey, you guys are going to be with me? I'm running from Saul right now, but let me tell you something about that. God's got this. God will be the avenger of blood. God will be the one who rescues me. I don't know when it's going to happen. It's in God's time, but God is the one that's going to show up. And he's exhorting these people in the cave. It is phenomenal. He's giving them a talk. And I believe, just try to imagine, you guys really think I have an agenda here. I promise you I don't. It's just what happened. He's got a lyre and he's singing. Just imagine the reverberance of the room. Imagine David playing his guitar. And, he's plucking these beautiful strings, and it's just reverberating in the cave. And then you heard the singing this morning. It was just so beautiful to sing that song with you guys. It was just a beautiful act of worship. And you think about that rich harmony, but in a cave. Think about what that would have sounded like when all of their voices start joining in David's voice, and they're singing together, and they're being built up by singing. They're singing to one another psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. They're teaching and admonishing one another. That's what Ephesians and Colossians says music does. And they're actually doing it. It's awesome. You just think about it. So David, guys, we talked about it yesterday. He's using all of his talents in the cave. All of them, young people. He's using his ability to speak. He's using his musicality. He's using his ability to identify with them as tough guys. He's identifying that, and he's meeting the people where they are. And that's what you all need to do. You need to meet people where they are and use your talents to glorify God. And I think he's doing these psalms like this. He's sharing these psalms because he wants them to show. He wants to transform them. And we're going to see tomorrow that it's exactly what he's going to do over the next many outlaw years. He wants to transform them. Come, children, I'm going to teach you. He wants to teach them and uplift them. He doesn't want them to stay in a downtrodden, in debt place, although then we're going to have money for a little bit of time. But these people are the people that are going to become David's rulers in his kingdom when he becomes king. See, David is being prepared as a king, and he's also preparing his entourage. They all come from nothing. They all came from the dirt. They all had nothing. And God is going to use this period of trial not only to transform David into a king, but to create all the administration of his kingdom. That is awesome. So let's think about what happens in the rest of this chapter before David goes on the run again. Turn back to Psalm 1 Samuel 22. So really just to get an understanding of how we land for tomorrow morning. But 1 Samuel 22, you finish that rest of that passage, and look what happens. David becomes captain over them, and they're with him about 400 men. So David goes from Mizpah to Moab. He looks after his parents. He actually drops off his parents into Moab. Anybody know why that might have been? Just think again, go back to that genealogy. What makes him bring his parents over to Moab? Well, he's not going to leave them with anyone in Israel, and he certainly changed his mind about going to Gath. But guess what? David has a mixed lineage. He might even have some blood relatives there. And all he's got to do is drop the great-grandma Ruth story and talk about Rahab and talk about the whole lineage. But if he mentions Ruth, he's good. So he goes there. He drops off David. Now look what the prophet Gad, like out of nowhere, God needs to say something to him. And out of nowhere, Gad shows up. And Gad says, David, do not remain in the stronghold. Depart and go into the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. And unfortunately, Saul is tracing every one of his steps. And he traces him back, unfortunately, to the tabernacle at Nob. And he murders them all. And then David hears about it. Think about the emotional roller coaster that David is on now. He now realizes that a poor decision of his, a decision that he thought might have been correct, but had he thought about it a little bit more, he might have known Saul and done something different. Unfortunately, Saul sends his men and they kill all of the priests. Not even just the priests. Man, woman, child, infant, ox, donkey, he put to the sword. And David's perspective, look at verse 22 or verse 20. But one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. And think about David's heart now. David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day that when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, and I have occasioned the death of all the persons in your father's house. But what does he say? He can't look back with regret. He can't look back on distress. He's got all of these people to look after. And what does he say? He says, stay with me and do not be afraid. For the one who seeks my life seeks your life. And with me, you shall be in safekeeping. As we approach these memorials now, and we think about when we take these memorials, I want you to think about what you carry this morning. I want you to think about the Lord keeping you in safekeeping, because he said, did he not? Come to me. Just like they went to David. He said, come to me, all who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. I'm going to do life with you. Learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And when he did that to people, they accused him just like they accused David. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they said, look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And he wasn't that concerned about that. 2,000 years ago, young people, there was another king in waiting, anointed by God, running from the false rulers, with a ragtag group of distressed, in debt, and discontented Jews, looking for a leader and following him into places where he had nowhere to lay his head. And he too ended up alone, caught up by the enemy in a lone, dark cave. But guess what? His family showed up in that lonesome, dark cave, in the cold hills of Judah, in a cave. And this time it was sealed by a stone. His family show up and strengthen him. They strengthened the Lord's hand in God, raised him up, and the angels were standing by him. And God lifted him up, and he became captain over those confused disciples who ran to him. And the Lord Jesus became captain over them. Hebrews says that he made the captain of our salvation perfect through suffering. And as we remember Christ now, we remember the price that God paid and that Christ paid to make our captain of our salvation perfect through suffering, just like David. And my prayer is that we will take up, as we feel, that we will take up the words of hymn 327. Come unto me, ye wanderers, and I will give you light. O loving voice of Jesus, which comes to cheer the night. Our hearts are sometimes weary. Our hearts are filled with sadness and we had lost our way, but morning brings the gladness and songs the break of day. Come unto me, ye fainting, and I will give you life. O cheering voice of Jesus, which comes to aid our strife. The foe is strong and eager, the fight is fierce and long, but thou hast made us mighty and stronger than the strong. And whosoever cometh, I will not cast him out. O welcome voice of Jesus, which drives away our doubt, which calls us very sinners, unworthy though we be, of love so free and boundless, to come, dear Lord, to thee. Young people, if we are with him, even in our life's wilderness, we will also be in safekeeping.